All right. So we're going to start by talking about how heat and humidity can change running in different ways and how we can safely run in the heat this summer. And some of the mistakes that we often see people making here are that they expect to maintain the same level of training and the same paces during the summer that they were just training during the spring.
Yeah, I think that it's a combination of that statement there. You can try your best to essentially maintain that same level of training, but it's going to immediately affect your paces. Or you could try to maintain your paces, but you will immediately have elevated your level of training because
Right.
summer weather is different weather than what we've just come out of.
Right. And so when you start to notice that your paces are changing or the training load, like how hard your runs feel, how that's starting to change, a lot of runners end up trying to push harder to hit those same numbers. And they end up disappointed because either they're not hitting the numbers or they end up overtraining, which can lead to a lot of exhaustion, burnout, possibly even some injury. And a lot of times it leads all of these runners to question their fitness level. I see this all the time. People start seeing their paces dropping because they're trying to push hard in the heat and their paces are not as fast as they were in the spring or in the winter. And so they're like, I don't understand it. I'm losing my fitness. Why is my VO2 max going down on my watch? Why are all these numbers going down? Why are my paces? Why is it so hard to hit these paces in the summer?
And it's really hot outside.
Yeah.
It's real. I mean, it's not
I
that
wish it was more complicated, but
it
it's
really,
not.
it's that it's hot outside. And we
Yeah.
can go into a little bit of exactly why your VO2 max is actually dropping on your watch. This comes every time, and I know that it's going to happen every time, but it always dips on my watch every
Yep.
summer. And I do my best to not let a number on my watch that's, comes out of a random black box mixture anyway, determine my own personal fitness levels. But I also am coming off of illness, and the VO2 max always drops during illness. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to be able to bring that back up during June, but
Yeah.
I'll do the best and see what happens, and accept that I'm in the shape that I currently am and how I'm able to express that. If I could just magically transform myself from June to December, I'd be able to go way faster at the exact same fitness level. And I think that's what we have to accept.
And that's what we're going to kind of get into right now. So first, we want to start off by a basic review of what happens just when we exercise in general. Okay. So not even getting into heat stuff yet, but just when we exercise in general. So when we exercise, we metabolize fuel. So we take fuels in our body, whether that's sugar or fat, and we turn those things into energy. And during that metabolism process, 70% or more of the energy that we create is actually wasted as heat.
Yeah, we're remarkably inefficient in this process.
Yeah.
It's really, really bad.
And that's actually the point of training, is to make our bodies more efficient at this process, right? But even so, even with training, we still lose a lot of things as heat. So basically, our bodies are creating all of this energy. We're producing heat internally. So our body temperature goes up. Our core body temperature goes up. When that happens, our body then takes and tries to divert more blood to our skin to try to get rid of the heat. So the heat is in our blood. And so therefore our body's like, hurry, get the blood to the skin so that the heat can escape through the skin and leave the body. And so that by the heat escaping through our skin, that helps to keep the core temperature down.
Yeah, which works perfectly. And if it was cool outside, then exercise would do a great job of keeping you warm. Like, this is literally, your body does its functions, it metabolizes all the different fuels inside of it, and it helps keep you at an appropriate temperature. But when you're exercising, your body will then raise its internal temperature. So you push the heat to the surface and the heat goes away. If it gets real hot, then you start sweating. You go a step beyond just the heat getting near the surface, and it just kind of convection will push the heat away from you. Or you can actually start sweating, and then the heat gets transferred into the water at the surface. And then as the sweat evaporates, you're going to lose some of that energy also.
Right. And so as the sweat evaporates, then your body cools down, because as the water, leaves your skin, there's a cooling effect of evaporation. And so that's one way that your body then helps to cool itself down as well. But the problem is, well, I shouldn't say the problem. We're not getting into problems yet, but as you sweat, right, your body is losing water. And so you become more and more dehydrated throughout the course of a workout or throughout the course of a run. So the more you sweat, the more dehydrated you become. So you're losing water. which then means that your blood is getting thicker. Okay. Your blood is made up of plasma, of water, and then of red blood cells, white blood cells, lots of other different cells. And so essentially you're losing the water portion of the blood. And so your blood actually becomes thicker. Actually, a smoothie is a good example,
I was going
right?
to go with a smoothie. I was thinking raspberry smoothie when you're trying to push the blood through the body. Yeah.
Right. So you guys know that if you have a very thick smoothie and you try to suck it through a very thin, narrow straw, it's hard to get that smoothie out, right? So you can increase the size of the straw or you can make the smoothie more watery, right? And so if you think about it, as we sweat, that watery smoothie that we have becomes thicker and thicker and thicker. So it's harder to get that smoothie through the straw. So it's harder to get the blood through your arteries. And so then what happens then is that your heart has to work harder to pump that blood throughout the body. So it has to really work harder and increase the strength of each contraction and the number of contractions, which is your heart rate, to help push that blood throughout your body. And this is a phenomenon called cardiac drift. All right. And this is why your heart rate increases over the course of the run, even though your intensity level or your pace stays the same, because you're losing water, which means because you're sweating more, so that blood is becoming thicker. It's now harder to pump throughout the body. So your heart rate has to increase in order to compensate for that.
Right. So then you do your best to try and keep drinking water, essentially to try and keep the water level in your blood balanced out so that it doesn't get super, super thick and you're able to actually maintain a reasonable heart rate. But your body can only take in so much water and transfer it to your blood, because you take in some of the water and your body's like, oh, more water, let's sweat that out so we can cool the body down. It's trying to decide what to do because it has several things it wants to do at once.
Right.
Your body's also, oh, I need to cool myself down. So let's send all the blood towards the surface so that we can try and cool the body down. Except it also wants to be sending blood to your working muscles because you're running down the path.
Right.
So it has to do so many jobs simultaneously, and all of the jobs become a little less efficient. Exactly.
And so that really takes us to the advantages and the good things, the benefits of running in the heat.
I like this perspective.
There's a lot of things that we're going to talk about today of the quote unquote disadvantages, or the kind of the negatives, we're going to say, that aren't actually negatives, right? Because we want you guys to start thinking about this a little bit differently, because a lot of times, kind of going back to what we were saying before, if we see those paces coming down, or if we feel our runs getting harder, our brain wants to tell us that we're losing fitness. Our brain wants to tell us that we're doing everything wrong. Our brain wants to tell us that the training plan is wrong and that I'm not a runner and that none of this is good. And I might as well just stop, and I might as well just pop open a beer and hang out in the pool for the rest of the summer because all of it's worthless, right? And that is not the case, all right? Your body becomes much more efficient at handling the heat the more you do it, okay? Our bodies make physiological adaptations. Our bodies are amazing. Our bodies adapt to the load that we placed on them, no matter what it is, right? That's really what we are talking about in running in general, right? We apply a load to our body. Our body is either can handle that load and we're good to go, or it can't handle that load. And so it needs to build back and get stronger or become more efficient in order to accept that load and figure it out the next time we encounter that same thing. So by running in the heat, we are actually allowing our body to make these physiological adaptations and to become more efficient in a lot of different areas that will benefit us as runners. It will benefit our fitness, both as it's happening and later on down the road.
Okay, but on that same idea, the heat adaptation is similar to your overall fitness running adaptation. If you're currently capable of running for 30 minutes, it's not going to be a good idea tomorrow to go run for 3 hours. If you're currently used to running in 60-degree weather, Fahrenheit, for those of you listening overseas who thought I just boiled you, if you're currently running in 60-degree weather, it's not going to be reasonable to say, oh, I'll be able to do the exact same run at the exact same speed in 90-degree weather tomorrow. It needs to be a gradual transition, and you don't have control over the weather. So you don't have control over the temperature gradual transition. So if it goes from being like a very mild spring to intense summer the next day, you have to adjust yourself. You have to adjust your own training so that you can make it a gradual transition.
Yeah. And you have to also adjust your mindset mindset around your training that's one of the biggest keys here. We're going to give you lots of action items and actual things that you can do to help adapt to summer running, so that you can have a blast.
Nailed it. Really, really good.
I know. I mean, I've been waiting for years to name a podcast Summer Running Had Me a Blast. I mean, it's just going to happen this time. So what are some of the physiological adaptations that our bodies make when we run in the heat? So there is a phrase out there, right? That training in the heat is poor man's altitude.
Poor man's altitude.
Right? Because you probably have heard that elite athletes often go to Colorado, Arizona, places that have higher altitude levels because your body makes adaptations at altitude. One of those adaptations is it creates more red blood cells. So you have more blood circulating through your body and you have more cells that carry oxygen throughout your body. Same thing happens for us in heat and humidity. We have improved blood flow to our muscles and to our skin to help dissipate that heat, because when we're running in the heat, like we just said, our internal core body temperature goes up. So our body has to figure out how to get rid of that heat so that we are able to continue to move forward without getting heat stroke. So our body becomes just naturally more efficient, like Kevin said, as long as we kind of do this in the right progression and make sure we're not overloading our body, but just kind of keep adding a little by little by little our exposure to that heat, increasing our training load during like in the heat. It becomes much more effective at improving that blood flow.
Okay, so one of the thoughts, and this kind of goes back to the what happened to my VO2 max, why is it dropping so much, is VO2 max is related to how much oxygen is getting to your muscles. So if you're like, well, it improves blood flow, that should be able to get more blood to the muscles. The problem is one of the other adaptations, and it's a wonderful adaptation, is your body creates more of the watery part of the blood. So your blood naturally, essentially, thins out a little bit. So for every quantity of blood that's going through your veins, you have fewer red blood cells at first, because the blood becomes more watery and less red blood cells. But then your body over time will be like, wait, we don't have enough red blood cells here. So it starts making more and more of them. So it's this constant back and forth of, I want it to have enough water in it so that when I start losing it because I'm sweating so much, it's going to be okay. But I want to have enough red blood cells. So you just keep actually building up both sides of the equation.
Right.
And eventually, when the temperature kind of cools back down, you're like, oh, I have all of these extra red blood cells. And now my VO2 max is going to start going through the roof.
Exactly. And this is also one reason, and it's not significant, but if you're someone that weighs yourself on a daily basis, you might notice an increase in your weight during summer months. And it is literally because you have more blood.
That's a win.
Yeah. It's literally, and for some people, it might not be noticeable on the scale. It really depends on how much running you're actually doing and what your weight is. And there's a lot of different factors that go into it, but you're actually creating more blood throughout your body. And that's a really good thing. And you're improving the efficiency of that blood flow to your skin and to your working muscles. Like we've talked about before with effort level training, especially if you're maintaining that L2 low, easy effort level training, you are also building capillary networks within your body so that you have more highways essentially to get the blood into those working muscles. So you're increasing the amount of blood that you have, and you're increasing the pathways to get the blood to the working muscles. All of that is going to benefit you in your level of fitness and everything in the future. All right. The next adaptation that your body makes is that it improves your body's ability to regulate temperature. So you actually start sweating sooner to help keep your core body temperature low, right? At this point, kind of wherever your starting point is, say you go out and you run for like 10 minutes and then you start sweating, but then you start going out in the heat, your body will actually start sweating sooner. So you might start sweating after like 5 minutes. If you're here in South Florida, you start sweating within about 30 seconds.
And I tied my shoes and I'm dripping.
I know, especially in like later in the summer in August. But this is actually a really good physiological adaptation. So your body starts sweating sooner to help keep that core body temperature low so that your core temperature doesn't rise as quickly.
Right. And so this is an issue sometimes when you throw humidity on top of this is if you start sweating sooner and you're sweating more, your body's like, no, I'm going to get really good at sweating, but it's not evaporating anywhere. It's not really cooling you down.
Well, we're going to get into that more when we get into the humidity.
I know we're going to repeat this part, but I think that it's important. Maybe it's just me here in South Florida, but sweating sooner is a good thing because it helps lower your core temperature before it starts rising too much.
Yeah.
Like your body is like, oh, you're starting to exercise before we even near that 100-degree internal temperature.
Right.
We made it from like 98.6. Now we're up to 99, 99 and a half. Start sweating now. It starts setting off the alarms earlier because it anticipates that an increase in core temperature is coming.
Exactly. The other thing that you do when you exercise in the heat is that your body actually learns how to be more efficient with energy metabolism. So when we sweat, as we burn energy, we create energy, we're burning it off during exercise. When we sweat out, yes, we're sweating out water, but we also sweat out electrolytes. We sweat out those minerals like potassium and calcium and magnesium and sodium. Those are the four big ones. But as we continue to exercise in the heat and adapt to the heat, our body actually learns how to retain more of those electrolytes. And so we actually lose less electrolytes in our sweat the more trained we become.
Right. But not to the level that you don't actually have to replace those electrolytes.
Right.
As much sweating as you are likely to be doing over the summer, you can't be like, well, if I just keep doing it, eventually I'll hold on to all my electrolytes. It's not a safe method. Let's stay safe out there.
Right.
Replace both the liquids and the electrolytes.
Right.
Maybe replace the liquids and the electrolytes and actually bring in some calorie sources. Like if you're working harder in the heat, you might need to take on fuel faster than you would in cooler temperatures also.
Right. And we're going to get into more of those action items later in the podcast. Okay.
Sorry, I keep jumping the gun.
I know
I'm so excited for heat training.
It's so excited.
I love heat training.
I know, but I'm just trying to help. I don't want to throw too much at, we have it organized for a reason, so we're helping people understand.
Keep me on schedule here.
Oh man. Okay. So far we've gone over what happens when you exercise and some of the advantages and physiological adaptations that occur when we train in heat. So here's the thing. We don't want you to shy away from training in the summer. We want you to be able to maintain that consistency in the summer, especially if you have goals for later in the year, the fall, next spring, or just, life in general. Yeah. Like I want to stay consistent because it's important for me to run and to exercise on a weekly basis because of my heart health and my brain health and all the other important things. Right. So you don't have to shy away from running in the heat, from running in the summer, as long as you do it properly. We're going to talk about more of those tips at the end. So lots of advantages of running in the heat. Keep doing it. We're going to teach you how to do it safely. Okay. Let's go over a couple of the quote unquote negatives and how heat and humidity can affect your performance. And the reason we want to talk about this is that a lot of people, like we said at the beginning, tend to start feeling bad about their numbers as they start running in the heat. And we don't want you guys to do that because we want you to understand that there's a very scientific, physiological reason that your paces are getting slower and that it feels a lot harder.
Right. So these are supposed negatives, but really they're facts. They're just cold, hard facts that you need to accept. And if you can really push it into your brain, then your mindset will be like, all right, I slowed down because it's really hot outside.
Yeah. It's not a negative. It's just what happens.
It's just what's happening. Science. All right. So here's the thing. Your body starts performing below ideal way before you might say it's hot outside.
Right.
Like, here in South Florida, it's already 1 billion degrees, but we had some people on our coaching call. They were like, it was pretty hot for me. Maybe not that hot, but it was like 75. It was
upper 70s. Yeah.
And that is well past where your body is working at like ideal temperatures. Your body likes low to mid 50s. Depending on how far you're running, somewhere in that temperatures. By the time it's 60 degrees outside, you're already 2 to 3% slower than your ideal temperature performance, which is a lot. But,
so how much is it?
Okay. So if you're cruising along at like an 8-minute mile,
because 2 to 3% doesn't sound like that much.
If you're cruising along normally at 8-minute miles, now suddenly you're doing 8:12s. And 15 seconds per mile is going to add up. If you go off on a 4-mile run, you're now a minute slower by the end of it. You check your watch, you're like, how did I go a minute slower?
Right.
Because 15 seconds adds up.
Right. If you're at a 10-minute mile, we're talking like 20 to 30 seconds different.
Right.
Right. So that's multiple minutes.
Yeah. You go off on a 6-mile run at 10-minute pace, and you're now coming in 3 minutes slower than normal. You look at your watch, you might be like, whoa, that is a lot. And that's only at 60 degrees. When you ramp that up to 80 degrees
Fahrenheit,
at 80 degrees Fahrenheit, you're talking a 12 to 15% change.
Yeah.
Okay.
12 to 15% decreased in efficiency.
Yes.
Or increase in pace.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're looking at turning an 8-minute mile into over a 9-minute mile. That's a lot. If you ever try and race over the summer with hot temperatures out there, and you're like, I got nowhere near my personal best, and I'm going as hard as I possibly can. Yes, you are. You're going as hard as you possibly can, and you are nowhere near your personal best time-wise.
Right. So if you can run a 10-minute mile when it's 50 degrees outside, we're talking about over an 11-minute mile, like somewhere between 11 and 12-minute mile pace if it's 80 degrees. And that's the same effort level that your body is feeling.
Right.
Right. We're not even talking about, oh, this is just an easier effort level. No. Keeping effort level the same, your pace is automatically going to be that much slower.
Right. So you just have to accept straight off the bat, I'm going to slow down over the summer because I want to maintain my appropriate effort levels.
Right.
It's not, I'm going to ramp up all my effort levels over the summer because that seems like a great idea. It's not. Just maintain your effort levels.
Yeah. Make sure that you're maintaining that easy effort, regardless of what that number pace is on your watch. Okay. So that's just talking about temperature. Now let's talk about humidity. When you, okay. So this is what we know all about, right? Down here in South Florida. So when you are running in humidity, it automatically increases your RPE, your radiant of perceived exertion, or your effort level. Okay. So anything between 60 and 90% humidity, which is just every day here in Florida, can increase your heart rate about 10 beats per minute. So again, that 8-minute mile that we're talking about can feel like a 6-minute mile because your heart rate is that much higher just because of the humidity alone.
Yeah, I mean, depending on where you're falling on your RPE scale at an 8, yeah, it could push you very close. The hardest thing I find over the summer is not the easy runs because I've mentally accepted I'm gonna slow down, it's gonna be okay. It's the moderate runs.
The tempo.
Like hard is kind of hard. And easy, I just keep it easy. But that moderate tempo, where it's like, it's right on that line where I know if I can hang out here, I can maintain this effort level and my heart rate basically doesn't drift for however long I stay at the moderate effort.
Yeah.
But if you push just a little bit too much on moderate, your heart rate starts climbing through the roof. It just immediately starts shooting up on you.
Because you break that threshold.
Exactly. As soon as you clear the threshold, your heart rate's now just like, oh, we're on the other side. Let's start climbing. And suddenly you can go from what should be moderate to suddenly it's a death march, like brutal run very, very quickly. I think moderate is one of the hardest things for me personally to grasp over the summer.
I agree. And I think that that's also because, again, we're looking at that pace, right? We can accept maybe that, okay, our easy pace needs to feel easy regardless of whatever
the number is.
But my tempo pace is this, right? Like if it's not 8-minute pace, if it's not, in your case, whatever that is, 6-minute pace, if it's not 10-minute pace, then all of a sudden I've lost fitness.
Yes, easy is easy, but God forbid my tempo pace starts with a 6.
Right.
Like that somehow I can't hit that mental shift.
Exactly.
And it's a thing that I have to literally re-say to myself every time I'm out there. And then it flips if suddenly it's so hot outside that it's not even safe. So now I'm doing a run inside in an air-conditioned gym. Like, oh, now I'm flying. So I must be in amazing shape. No, I'm not in amazing shape. I'm in air conditioning is what I'm in. That's what I am in.
Right.
I am in air conditioning.
Yeah. And we get so many questions about treadmill running. And they're like, is treadmill running the same as running outside? And the answer is no. It's not. It's just not. Like running is running, right? And you're still getting benefits from both, but you're getting different benefits from both. And number one is the air around you, just the air. And so speaking of the air around you, if you live in a very humid environment, you know what that air feels like. The air is heavy. The air is saturated with water already, because that's what humidity is. So what happens is if the air is already saturated with water, water does not evaporate as quickly. Basically, what happens is less evaporation is occurring. So going back to what we were talking about as far as how our body cools us, we push water out of our blood onto our skin so that that water evaporates. But there's too much water in the air, so the air can't take the water off of our skin. The water cannot evaporate into the air because it's too saturated already. Think about a wet sponge. It's hard to put more water into a sponge that is already full, right? If you squeeze that sponge out, if you have a super dry sponge, that sponge will soak up anything, right? But if we have a super wet saturated sponge, you're not going to soak up more water. You're just going to spread that water around the kitchen counter if you're trying to wipe it off.
Yes.
Right. And that's exactly what happens with us on our skin. So there's so much moisture in the air, we're not getting that evaporation cooling effect. So that actually leads for a decreased ability for the body to cool itself. So then what happens? This is such a fun cycle, right?
No, it's not.
It's not.
It's not
So
a
what
fun
happens
cycle.
is that the body then tries to compensate by sweating more to get the cooling effect, right? Because it's not working. We're trying to sweat. We're sweating. We're trying to get our body cooled down, but it's not evaporating because there's too much moisture in the air. So our body's like, what's happening? I'm not cooling down. So I sweat even more. So that can lead to increased dehydration much quicker when that all happens.
Your body does eventually learn this.
Yes. And again, that's an advantage of continuing to train.
Right. So the same way that we talked about your body does get to sweating faster, it also, once you realize that sweating is not doing anything, you've run in humidity day after day after day, your body will actually realize that sweating only works to a point. It's going to continue to do it. It doesn't shut down sweating. If you've stopped sweating, you should stop exercising because you're so dehydrated, you're starting to reach danger zone.
Right.
But eventually your body will be like, all right, I can only sweat up to a point because it's not doing much for me. It does help to have the surface of your skin wet because that helps with the convection of actually leaving the heat from your body, not even through evaporation, but just through convection. It helps to push the heat out with a wet surface versus dry surface. But once the skin is wet all over you, your body's like, all right, this is what I've got. But it takes some time to make that progress, to flip this switch.
Right. All right. What about dry heat? Okay. Now,
it's great.
Again, I don't know anything about dry heat. I grew up and have lived pretty much all of my life in South Florida. You're familiar with some dry heat.
I know the dry
situations, though, being from California. So let's talk about some dry heat conditions.
Okay. The issue with dry heat that sometimes comes up is the opposite that comes up with sweating and humidity is if it's super dry outside, you could be sweating a whole lot and it's evaporating almost immediately. And so you're like, apparently I'm doing fine today. I'm barely sweating at all, but it's evaporating so rapidly that you don't realize how much you're sweating. I
noticed that when I went to California for the first time, like running out there, and I came back and I wasn't all sweaty. It was the strangest sensation.
Right. So one of the things here is you have to make sure that you are taking in plenty of fluids during the run, after the run, because it's hard to visually see how much you're actually sweating. You run here in South Florida and you're like, okay, well, clearly I need a gallon of water because that's at least what I just lost in the last 5
We're like wringing out our clothing, literally.
Right. Like I wring out my socks after runs throughout July and August. But in dry air, the sweat evaporates so quickly. One of the ways that you might be able to tell is the salt that starts showing up on your clothes, on your arms. I get salty arms afterwards, so that's a way that you can check it, but you can accidentally get dehydrated way faster than you think that you're actually getting dehydrated.
Yep, exactly. So that's a really important thing to remember, is that even if you're not sweating, you're still losing water. So make sure that you're still drinking water, right? And that you replace it afterwards.
And again, the body, it helps control its temperature through sweating and through convection of just getting the heat to the surface, but it works better if the surface is wet. So you're just going to keep sweating and sweating and sweating, even if it doesn't look like it, because your body wants to keep the surface wet, which is, I know we're probably not supposed to do it tips and tricks yet, but just keeping your surface wet, wetting a hat, wetting a shirt in a dry heat is really helpful.
That is helpful. Okay, a couple One small note that I wanted to make about some gender differences in the way that men and women handle the heat. Okay. Women in general, and this is really important for all my ladies out there. Okay. We women in general sweat less. Our sweat is more diluted. Okay. And we have fewer sweat glands per square inch of our skin.
Really? That is fascinating.
Fascinating.
Like fewer sweat glands per square inch.
Yes. And our sweat glands are more distributed in our arms and in our hands. Like I know I sweat a lot, like from my arms.
It just generally leads to a glistening effect.
Glistening, yes. And we also sweat later than men in
like
general.
At night?
No, that's you. You're the sweaty one at night. I don't know what happens on your side of the bed at night, but no, we in general, so we sweat later into our run, right? So if a man starts sweating at the 5-minute mark, women might not start sweating till like the 8-minute mark in the same circumstance. And obviously, all of this is individual, right? I have some friends that 10 minutes into their run, they look like they just got out of a pool, like every single time.
Yep.
And then I have other friends that look like they're glistening and barely are sweating and running with their hair down, you know? So there's a ton of individual differences as well. But just understand this, as a woman, you already have kind of a disadvantage when it comes to sweating, because we as women just tend to sweat less, sweat later, and sweat in different places. And then we also deal with heat differently in the different phases of our hormone cycle, right? So in our monthly cycle, we've got ups and downs in our hormones, and we sweat differently in those phases based on our hormone levels.
As you say, sweating more intensely, like under the arms, seems to be less helpful rather than sweating just like everywhere all over your body, because it's like, it seems like it'd be harder to evaporate from underneath your arm.
Right. And that's why it's harder for women, right?
Yeah.
Whereas men, they actually have more of their sweat glands in their torso.
Okay.
So you can just sweat all over your chest, right? Like chest, stomach, back. Your torso is the main part of your body, right? So, as a woman, it's very important for us to know that we have more inclination to be affected by these heat-related conditions, and by heat in general.
That's super important.
All right. So real quick, before we jump into our tips for you guys,
they're coming.
A quick review of some heat-related conditions that you need to be aware of. If you start to have any of these symptoms, you need to stop running and possibly seek medical attention. If not, all the way to medical attention, you definitely need to start doing something. So number one, dehydration. Okay. Symptoms of dehydration include muscle cramping, dizziness, fatigue, and like a mental fog. And also thirst, right? So if you actually start feeling thirsty, you're already dehydrated.
Oh, yeah.
So you want to start drinking water before you're thirsty. So if you start to experience any of that, make sure you stop and you start to hydrate. The second level is heat exhaustion, which causes a major drop in your performance. And symptoms of heat exhaustion include dizziness, headache, nausea, cold and clammy skin, and profuse sweating. And this means that your core body temperature is above 104 degrees. Okay. So if you're ever out on your run and you start feeling really cold, you need to stop running and you need to get some water immediately, and cool yourself down.
If you've moved from dizziness, like if you're running and it's hot outside and you're dizzy and you're carrying water with you, start drinking more.
Yeah.
You probably don't need to end your run right then. Start drinking more, be aware, be paying attention, but you might be okay. Maybe slow it down a little bit. If you go from dizzy to cold, you're done. Yeah. You're done, because your temperature is way out of control.
Right. Because God forbid, you don't want to hit the last, which is heat stroke, the last stage. If you reach heat stroke, you have a core body temperature over 105 degrees. This can be life-threatening, okay? This leads to disorientation with clumsiness, confusion, poor balance, and a lack of sweating. So if you ever stop sweating, you need to seek immediate medical attention, because you need to cool that body temperature as quickly as possible. Get yourself in a cold bath. Maybe it's not you, maybe it's a friend, maybe you're out running with friends, maybe you're at a race and you start to notice some of these symptoms in someone else. Help them and get them medical attention as quickly as possible.
Yeah, no, ice bags under the arms and down the crotch. That is the answer. I have been there. It is not pleasant, but it's not the time to be like, oh, well, let's see if it's okay. No. Right. That you need to ice them down quickly and save them.
Okay, so we are finally to the point where we can start giving everybody the tips.
Yeah, tips.
Tips on how to train in high heat and humidity. We've got 10 tips for you, and then we actually have a couple bonus tips at the end, specifically for races.
Bonus tips, lots of tips.
Action items.
It's nice to help. Like,
Yeah.
it's really good sometimes on things like this to be like, look, make sure that you reduce your effort levels and there's some overall stuff. But it's nice to say, all right, let's put some actual very clear, do this. This is going to help very clearly on a run today.
Yes. Okay. So number one, run by effort, not by pace. So like we said, running feels harder in the heat. So don't aim for specific paces because you don't know how your body's going to respond to the heat. With everything that we've just covered, you know now that your body has to work on moving you forward and also keeping itself cool so that you don't overheat and dehydrate and end up with heat stroke. Okay. So give your body a break, train by effort, not by paces. So if you are normally used to running by paces, say your easy pace is normally, say, a 10-minute pace. Instead of thinking, okay, I need to maintain that 10-minute pace, understand that you just need to go at an L2. On a scale of 1 to 10, how hard does this run feel? It needs to feel like a level 2 for you to maintain that easy effort level. And for a lot of people, this also means adding walking breaks in.
Yeah, no, definitely adding walking breaks in on a regular basis might be super helpful. If you're normally running in like a 11 to 13 minute range, you're probably just going to want to start adding walking breaks. That way it's going to maintain that effort level throughout.
Right, which takes us directly to number 2, which is slow down, okay? Add walking breaks in or go with run walk intervals to maintain those low effort levels.
Normally, when we go with run walk intervals, I always suggest like have a regular pattern that you're going to work with. I'm going to run for 3 minutes and walk for a minute. I'm going to run for 5 minutes, walk for a minute. You're not sure. Like if it's starting to get hot on you or if it suddenly gets hot on you, it's unsure exactly what that run walk ratio might be. So it might take some experimentation. It might take a little bit of time to be like, all right, I'm going to try running for 4 and then walking for 1. Nope, that didn't work. By the end of it, I had to run for 2 and walk for 1. Or maybe by the end of it, it didn't feel even up to that like easy effort. It felt too much walking. So maybe next time you're going to push a little bit more, not push the pace, but stretch the run out just a little bit longer.
Yeah, it's an experiment. And I think that that's really important to remember also is that you're trying to kind of figure out how your body is adapting to this heat and how the heat affects you on any given day. And some of the things that we're going to talk about in the rest of these tips also are going to have an effect on how far you're going to be able to run, how you're going to feel, how hydrated are you, all of these things. So understand that an interval that works well for you on one day might not always work well for you on another day. So be willing to adjust it, right? Like there's nothing wrong if one day you're going out and doing 5 ones and then the next day you go out and you need to do 3 ones. There's nothing wrong with that. The only thing that you need to be focused on is your effort level. The paces during the summer do not matter. I don't think I can say that enough, right? Because it is so important for us to remember that just because your paces are slower than they were in the fall, in the spring, in the winter, that doesn't mean that you're detraining. It doesn't mean that you're out of shape. It doesn't mean that your fitness is declining. It just means that your body is adapting to the heat.
Excellent. All right. Number 3, stay hydrated. And this is more complicated than it sounds. And how hydrated you are is going to go back to how long you can run, how quickly you start feeling that fatigue.
Right.
Because if your body's main mechanism trying to cool itself down is sweating and you don't have that level of hydration, it's going to be difficult for you to sweat. So stay hydrated. A ballpark 4 to 8 ounces every 15 to 20 minutes. That's a really wide range, 4 to 8 ounces. Suggests over the course of an hour, you're somewhere between 16 ounces and 32 ounces. That's a big range that we're working with here.
Right. And again, you have to start knowing your body. How much of a sweater are you? If you are someone that naturally just sweats a lot, you're going to need to take in more water during the run because you need to replace those fluids as you sweat them out. You're also going to need to probably replace electrolytes as well. And we don't actually have that as a separate tip on here, but that is important, is that you need to aim for, that's why we said to take in fluids, right? Like some of it does need to be plain water, I would say. Like maybe not need to be, depending on how long you're going.
Well, it kind of depends on the distance.
But some of it could be regular water, but if you're going for long distances, especially anything over an hour, you're going to want to definitely replace electrolytes along the way also.
Well, if you're going within over an hour, you're probably taking in fuel sources also.
Right.
And most of the fuel things have electrolytes added into them,
Mhm.
but you could also do just a pure liquid fuel.
Right.
I find fueling with like gels and chews and stuff more difficult in hotter temperatures.
Right.
It's a million degrees. I don't want to chew. So liquid fueling options like drinks with calories in them is a good option at that point.
Well, there's a reason that you don't want to chew and take in that fuel also, right? And it's because a lot of the goos and everything, now your body has to digest them.
Yep.
And your body's already trying to run and cool itself down. So there's less blood available for digestion.
Yes.
Right. So, like we were talking about before, your body still has to figure out how to essentially triage the blood. Like, where do I need to send the blood and how much does each area need? Like, your body's trying to figure all of this out as you're running. And that's why a lot of times people can end up with GI issues during the summer months and during heat, like when they never had GI issues before.
Yeah, 100%. On the stay hydrated thing, plan your route around water fountains. Or if you can do a loop and you're like, all right, it's going to be a longer run, but you're going to make it like the same loop 4 times, just stick a water bottle out there so you can get it. And this is not need to be like, I'm going to hang out at the water fountain for 5 minutes and take a long time. It's get a drink of water and continue, which means you don't have to worry that you're stopping on the run. It's like, oh man, my run was shot because I had to stop and get a drink of water. If you ever hit a stoplight at an intersection, you have to stop and do that. You don't need to jog at the intersection waiting for the light to turn green. When you stop and get a drink of water, you don't need to jog while trying to get your drink of water. You can just stop, get a drink of water, and then continue along.
Yep, absolutely. If you're not sure how much water you should be taking in, one of the tricks that you can do is you can actually weigh yourself before a run and then directly after the run. After you take off your clothes, well, for both times also, like, because you don't want to weigh yourself in dry clothes the first time and then in wet clothes the second time. Make sure that you are wearing the same thing when you weigh yourself. Okay. So weigh yourself before a run and then after a run. That will let you know how much water weight you lost during the run. So for every pound you lose, you need to replace that with 16 ounces of water. So if you're what Kevin was saying before about, 4 to 8 ounces every 15 to 20 minutes, if you're someone that is losing a lot of water, you're going to want to be on the high end of that. If you're someone that's not losing a lot of water weight, you can be on the lower end of that.
Excellent.
All right. Number 4.
Tip number 4, run early, run late. Try to avoid the midday sun. All the weather apps on your phone probably tell you this also. Like the worst time of the day to work out is essentially like that noon to 3, 1 to 4 timeline where the sun is basically right above you. In the afternoon is slightly worse than the morning, even though the sun's kind of at the same height because you've been building up the heat over the course of the day. So early afternoon is about as bad as it can get. Right.
Unless you're Kevin or an ultra runner that runs through the sun, you need to teach your body how to run through the sun.
Yeah.
Right. Like Kevin ran the Keys 100 last year, and he had to train himself to be able to run in full sun because that race started at like 5 a.m.
Started at 5.
And you run for essentially 24 hours until you finish 100 miles. Kevin ended up running for 14 hours that day. So he ran from 5 a.m. I think you stopped like around 14 hours would be 7-ish. Yeah. So he had to run during the day. So in order to prepare for that race, he had to run in that full sun. So keep that in mind too, is that if you're training for a specific race, what time does that race start? Are you going to be running in the full sun? You might want to do some of your running in the sun to start kind of acclimating your body to that. Just don't do all of your running in that.
Yeah, 100%. Weather. You don't need to torture yourself on every single run. You make adaptations pretty easily early on, and then it does not take an excessive amount of heat exposure to maintain those adaptations. People train for these races by spending time in sauna. Once you've made your major adaptations and increase your blood volume, you can be in the sauna like every week, like once a week will pretty much do it, which means if you're going to run a race where it's super, super hot, sun right over the top of you, doing that weekly is sufficient. Otherwise, you're literally just torturing yourself without much benefit.
Right, which takes us to number 5, which is run in the shade. Plan your run ahead of time and try to find routes that are lined with trees, right? And this is where trail running can be a really beneficial thing too, because a lot of times trails are more shaded. Also, trail running has natural surfaces like dirt and I guess sand. I mean, down here we have
We don't have dirt in
sand
Florida, it's
trails,
all sand.
right? And that natural surfaces actually help to absorb the heat and like dissipate the heat better than concrete and asphalt, right? Because concrete and asphalt absorb the heat and then actually transmit more heat back to you.
Yeah.
Right. So if you can try to find more natural surfaces to run on in shadier areas, that is ideal during the summer months. If you can't find that, and if you only have paved paths around you, do your best to try to find some shade, and that will help to keep your body cooler.
Right. And so if you're following some of these things, you're running early or you're running like right at dawn. And so it's a low sun
Yeah.
and it's a shady route, you're not getting as much heat. So your effort level and your pace might be closer to normal. They're still going to be adjusted. This is why we say the effort is key rather than the pace, because depending on how hydrated you are, how shady the run is, how early you were able to get out there,
Right.
it might not be that affected, even though you're dealing with summer training.
Exactly. Number 6, wear performance fabric and try to avoid cotton. You want to buy fabrics and clothing that are moisture wicking. You want to try to choose lighter colors. Okay. Socks are absolutely critical in the summer months because you're going to be sweating more. Number one, you're going to be sweating more. Number two, if you live in a humid environment, that sweat is not going to be evaporating from your skin. It's just going to be running down your legs into your socks and into your shoes.
Yep.
Okay. So if you are using cotton socks and cotton gets very wet, that's going to probably lead to some chafing, some blisters, some issues. So by having the moisture wicking fabrics, I mean, is it going to be perfect? No. Are your socks still going to be wet? Yes, but it's better than the cotton alternative.
Right. The cotton socks, the cotton shirts, they're going to hold water and they don't want to get rid of it at all. They want to hold it like a towel. It's why your towels are made out of cotton. So they absorb the water and keep it. If you use the moisture wicking stuff, all the different techie fibers, every brand's got a different one.
Yeah.
It does its best to try to stay as moisture free as possible. But when you're sweating a ton, it's just going to get wet. And as you sweat, like you said, the water's going to drip down and ultimately get to your socks. And once it's into your shoes, no matter how, whatever the fibers of the shoes are and how designed they are to allow the water to be free from the shoes, you're going to have wet feet. So taking care of your feet, toe socks, Injinji toe socks are a good one. Maybe using some anti-chafing products directly on your feet. They make some different products that you can literally rub around your individual toes so that they're not rubbing together. Or if you're out for a while, change your socks mid-run. Like if you're out for a while and your socks are just drenched, you're running down the field and you can literally, it seems like you've been going through puddles because it's squishing with every step, change your socks. Do a loop where you pick up water partway through and you're changing your socks out.
And possibly your shoes.
Possibly your shoes.
Right? Like if you're to that point where it feels like it's going through a puddle, if you have a couple of pairs of shoes that are on rotation, this is especially helpful for anyone doing really long runs. Like if you're marathon training during the summer months, having backup socks and shoes that you change halfway through that 20-mile run is a really beneficial thing.
Excellent. And just kind of on that same thing, I said anti-chafing products for like your feet, but also for every area that could possibly be chafed. When you're sweating so much and the material just literally can't deal with the amount of sweat, it is not as friendly to the skin. Right. Like wet material is going to lead to more chafing than a dry t-shirt. It's just going to. So areas that you've never had chafing in, you might get them over the summer.
Yeah. And if you've never chafed before, just beware, because I never chafed. I never had issues with chafing. And then we ran the Key West half marathon and it was pouring rain. I got very, very wet. And then suddenly my body decided it wanted to chafe. And since then I've chafed like on so many runs. Like I think my body was like resistant to it. And then once it happened once, now it's all the time.
Apparently that's what
I can chafe now. So yes, anti-chafing like rubs and creams are very, very helpful with all of that. Okay. Number 7, wear sun protection. Okay. If you get sunburned, that is going to affect your body's ability to get rid of heat. Essentially, if you get sunburned, your body can actually treat that like an allergic reaction.
Okay.
So if you've ever had a severe sunburn, number one, it's painful to the touch,
Yep.
right? So your body is sensing severe pain in a lot of circumstances. And sunburn can also lead to dehydration because your body is trying, like your body knows that it's damaged. So it's essentially an immune reaction that's happening in your body.
Okay.
And your body's trying to repair itself. And so there's not, again, it's taking resources away.
Yep. It's all resources somewhere.
Right, from being able to run. It's taking resources away from being able to cool itself because your body is trying to fix itself because it feels like it is damaged, because it is, right? And your skin is the largest organ in your body. And so if you have damage to your skin, your body is like trying to fight that as if it's an infection.
Okay.
So it's this intense, essentially immune reaction to sunburn. So you want to try to avoid sunburn as much as possible because that can essentially lead to greater levels of dehydration and then heat stroke and heat exhaustion.
Okay, so ways to use sun protection. Clothing is, I think, a great option here. Long sleeves, hats that have the flaps that cover your neck. Like these are good options because you can get the clothes wet and it literally will help keep the skin cooler. If you've ever worn a t-shirt in a pool, you're like, how come I'm cold while I'm in the pool? It's because the t-shirt is now a wet shirt up against your body, and that is helping you cool down. Sunscreen, depending on the type of sunscreen, can actually sometimes trap some of the heat in. The same way that it's blocking the sun from getting to you, it's also helping some of the heat from leaving your body, which could cause problems.
Right. And so it seems counterintuitive almost to wear long sleeves when it's hot outside. But if you live in Florida and you go out on the boat, you understand all the boaters are wearing long sleeves because they understand the importance of sun protection and how long sleeves, when made of the right material, can actually keep you cooler than not wearing sleeves at all.
Yeah, especially if you're not wearing sleeves, then you're covering yourself in like that thick, the wet zinc oxide kind of sunscreen.
Exactly.
That's going to trap the heat inside of you much more than putting like the sunscreen, like what is the UPF? Yeah. The like sunscreen protective clothing. And there are clothes that are designed, you're like, I can just put on any t-shirt. Some are specifically designed to help block the sun's rays. So you can check on different long sleeve products.
Right. So that goes back to that performance fabric, making sure that you're wearing good quality clothing to help you if you are going to be out in the sun. Another helpful thing would be to avoid that sun, like we talked about already.
There you go.
All right. Number 8, wear visors instead of hats because that will allow the heat to dissipate through the top of your head. Hats can sometimes trap the heat in. Visors, the top of your hat, the top of your head is not covered. So some of that heat can escape from the top of your head. And that's one of the one of the top places that our body tries to get rid of heat is through the top of our head. This does not apply if you are bald. Okay.
Because, very good point.
Right. Like if you are bald, it's more important for you to protect your skin and put a hat on versus allowing heat to rise off the top of your head.
Right. Just make sure that you're wearing like a nice techie fiber hat and the heat's going to be able to get out nicely while still blocking the sun's rays.
All right. Number 9.
Number 9, cold towel, cool water, something before and after. Okay. So if you finish your run and you are super, super hot, just get a towel, put it into some cold water and wrap that around your neck. It is going to make a huge difference. You can also do this before you leave, or if it's a particularly long run, you can do this in the middle of your run.
Yeah.
You can just sort of wrap a nice, cool, wet towel around your neck. It looks like a scarf, but it's actually cooling you down nicely.
Yeah. And this is one of the things that we had when Kevin did the Keys 100 last year. We had a whole cooler filled with these cold towels, in ice water. And we would just trade them out. As soon as he would come in, we would take his old one, give him a new one. He'd wrap it around his neck and he'd take off, just because that is trying to help keep that body temperature down. Some of the places that you also want to put cold packs or cold towels, especially if you need to cool your body down quickly, are your armpits and your groins. Okay. Those will cool you down very quickly. And actually the inside of your wrist is actually a good place as well. I know that's one of the things that I always do is if I'm out on a run, I'll find a water fountain and I'll let the water just run over the inside of my wrists. Wrists, armpits, groins, those are the 3 places that help to cool you down really quickly.
Yeah, people always, the old school football coaches used just be like, just pour the cold water on the back of your neck. Back of your neck is fine, but if it gets up towards like the back of your head, you actually hit the like heat sensor in your brain and you tell it that you're colder than you actually are. And it does not, it's actually dangerous because you think that you're a cooler temperature than you actually are. So careful with the back of the head.
Yeah, be careful with the back of the head for sure. All right. And number 10, sleep in cooler temperatures to help improve recovery. Okay. There's a whole thing about sleeping. I feel like, I don't remember if we've done a whole episode on sleep here or not. I know we've done like months of sleep focus within the academy. Like we had a whole month that we focused on improving our sleep quality. But sleeping in cooler temperatures will actually help your body recover more quickly and more completely. So when we say cool, it's probably cooler than you're thinking. It's like around 62 degrees, I believe.
Yeah,
like 62 degrees Fahrenheit. We don't keep our house that cold. I'll just tell you guys that. Like overnight in our house, it's like we set it to 72 degrees. And even that is still, I feel like it's a lot colder than we used to. Like we used to set it to 75. I brought it down to 72 and you can really feel a difference in the house. Some people like it a lot colder than that. The research is really showing that like 62 to 65 range. So if you want to pay your electric bills to get your house that cold, go for it. But even if you just decrease the temperature, even a couple degrees, that can help to improve your recovery as well.
Excellent. All right. So those are some good tips for training in the heat and humidity. We do have a few bonus tips on racing because sometimes you got races that happen over the summer and it is hot. Okay. And one of the big ones here is pre-hydration. Okay. Not like on the starting line hydration, but for a couple of days before, making sure that you are really taking in water, especially water the night before, that you are really taking on an extensive amount of water so that when you start sweating, you have the liquid in you to actually sweat out.
Yeah. And a lot of this goes with carb loading. So if you're training for a longer race, one of the reasons that you carb load is not only for those energy stores, but also because carbohydrates hold onto water. So you're actually hydrating as you're carb loading as well. That will improve everything. And you want to drink more water the night before. And one trick you can use as well is to eat a salty meal the night before or drink like some salty broth to help your body retain more water overnight.
It didn't seem like the fittest thing that you can possibly do, but when you're racing in super high temperatures, being slightly bloated at the starting line and retaining water is that's your winning key there. All right. Also pre-cooling. Okay. If you look back at the last Olympics, you look forward to next Olympics. God, the Olympics are coming again soon. It's very exciting.
I feel like you're like, go today.
We're almost back at the Olympics, which means we're almost back at the Olympic trials. It's all very exciting.
Yay. I think it's like 8 months to the Olympic trials.
Something like that.
I think I saw Sarah Hall post about that the other day.
Hooray.
Yeah.
The track athletes and athletes in all sorts of sports, they're wearing these ice vests before they head out on the track and actually compete. And then on like some trail races, they'll actually allow athletes to continue wearing ice vests. Or if they're not wearing like the fancy ice vests, they're wearing some sort of makeshift ice vest. I've seen like men's runners in ultra races put on like a sports bra and shove ice packs into them. Whatever they're doing to try and get ice onto their body as much as possible during the race, but you see it a lot before the race, trying to cool your core temperature before you start so that you're not starting at that 98.6, you're starting a degree below it. You don't want to bring on hypothermia, but just starting an extra degree cooler is a huge increase.
It is. And another way that you can do this is by taking in ice slushies to help lower your core body temperature. Because if you're taking on like a Slurpee, like an ice slushie, that's going to help to cool your body temperature more than just cold water alone.
Yes, you have to do the energy of converting the ice into water and then the water into warmer water, and it all helps cool you down a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Physics teacher. And then also stay out of the heat 24 hours before the event if you can. Okay, like if you can avoid the heat, if you can stay indoors in cool weather, maybe even in cold water, like if you want to go into the pool out of the sun, like if you have an indoor pool, right? It's trying to stay out of the heat and out of the sun for 24 hours before the event to try to keep your body temperature as low as possible. That's going to be a good thing that will help you on race day as well.
Yeah, it's probably not necessary to get that shakeout run as much as it is more beneficial to just stay cool the entire day.
Right. Or you can do your shakeout run early in the dark and then use the rest of the day to
Good call.
To stay out of the heat. Okay. So We hope that this was all helpful for you. This was part 1. We're going to be talking about summer running part 2 in our next episode. So make sure you stay tuned for that. We're going to be talking more about like what to do if you have vacations or other summer activities planned, changes in routines, that kind of things to make your summer running as effective and wonderful as possible. So, as always, guys, thanks for joining us. This has been the Real Life Runners podcast, episode number 310. If you like this podcast, don't forget to share it with a friend. Now get out there and run your life.